this morning's lesson, didn't have anybody that told me that they guessed who I was talking about. And in reality, that was the point of the lesson, because I wanted us to realize, those traits are good traits to have, but we need to get those traits in this life and not in the life to come. Because in the life to come, as we can look at the rich man, those traits benefited him nothing. He developed those traits, but they didn't benefit him anything. And so this morning, or this afternoon, I want us to talk about, as you can see on the board, having patience. And I was reading the other night, and I read across the passage in Luke chapter 21, verse 19. And it says, "By your patience possesses your soul." By your patience, you possess your soul. Now, if you look at that context of what he's talking about there, Jesus had told the disciples about, the signs of the end, the destruction of Jerusalem. And in reality, he answers them two questions there. When is the end of Jerusalem, and when is your coming again? And Jesus says, and Jesus answers those two questions. And we had a lesson about that some time back. But here in verse 19, he says, "By your patience possesses your soul." By our being patient, we possess our soul. In other words, by being patient, we get our soul to heaven. And I think that's what the point he's trying to say there, by waiting, by understanding. Now, what is the definition of patient? When you think of somebody that is patient, what do you think about? Do you think about somebody that, today's society, we are not very patient, are we? This afternoon, going home, I went in front of Nancy Black's house and then come up to the four-way coming from Murray. And then I pulled up there and stopped, and there was a lady, I don't know who she was. She came up to the stop sign, barely stopped, and then made a left-hand turn. And I thought, I was supposed to be the one to go. And then I thought, what's your lesson tonight? Be patient. Maybe she was in a hurry. Maybe I didn't know what was going on. But anyway, we're not patient today, because we live in a world where we want things right now. Used to years ago, when something happened overseas, it took a few days before it got to us. But now something can happen around the world, and we know it as it's happening. And, we want to know things now. How many times have you wanted to know the answer to a question and grabbed your phone and said, "Hey, Google, tell me what this is"? When I was preparing for this lesson, I went to Google and said, "Define patience." And as we looked at that definition, the definition of being patient, it is accept or tolerant. Someone who accepts their situation, someone who is tolerant, and they accept delays. In other words, and don't get anxious about it when delays happen. How many of us, when we're driving down the highway and we come up on an accident or construction work and we're in a traffic jam, how many times do we get impatient and want to go on and not be sitting there because we're in a hurry? Accept or tolerant of delays, problems, suffering, without becoming annoyed or anxious. That's the definition of being patient. Now, if we flip over to 2 Peter chapter 1 and look there at what we refer to sometimes as the Christian virtues. And he says in verse 5, beginning in verse 5, "But also for this very reason, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge, to knowledge self-control, to self-control perseverance, Now that perseverance there is patience. Being patient. And you know, you begin to think about there, when you think about patience, what book do you think about when you think about being patient? Book of Job, right? You think about the patience of Job. But how was Job's demeanor as he was going through that suffering? Did he suffer quietly? He didn't, did he? He was vocal about his suffering. You know, I was reading one book talking about the book of Job, and it being more a book not so much about the patience of Job, but about the patience of God. Because look at all the things, you know, remember Job's friends were saying, well, you know, you've done something wrong and God is punishing you for what you've done wrong. And Job was then turned around and was questioning God. Remember that, and Job's wife told him, said, you just need to give up. Just curse God and die. And, you know, God was enduring all of that. But we read about the patience of God, I think, in the book of Job. But also, we read of the endurance of Job, him persevering, him hanging on. And I think that's one of the things that we can look at as being patient is hanging on. Don't give up. And I want us to look at a few areas this afternoon in which we need to have patience. Well, we need to work on our patience. And we may need to, individually, we may need to work on that. If you look in 1 Peter chapter 2, remember he said there in verse 6, add to the self-control perseverance. We need to be more patient with ourselves sometimes. We need to understand that being a child of God is a growing process. And you know, as you look through these Christian virtues here, that it is a growing process. You know, when we became a child of God, when we were baptized, we became a Christian. For lack of a better way to say it, it was an event. It was something that happened. But then when we became a child of God, then we continue to grow, and it's a lifelong process. You know, in 1 Peter chapter 2, he talks about as newborn babes desire the sincere milk of the Word. And that babe then grows, and the more it grows, the more it, you know, learns, and the more it eats, the more it grows, and it just goes and goes and goes. So it's a process. The same way is with us as children of God. We grow, and we need to understand that some grow at a different pace. And we need to be patient with ourselves. We need to understand that as David, you know, I may have to ask God for forgiveness for a sin that I committed this week. Next week, I may have to ask God for the same sin to forgive me of. You know, and so sometimes we may become impatient with ourselves. You remember what Paul said, you know, the things I want to do, I don't do, and the things I hate, I do. You know, that's the way we are. We're human beings, and we make mistakes, and God knows that. But at the same time, we need to be patient with ourselves. But we need to make sure that we continue to grow. Secondly, along the same lines, we need to be patient with each other. So many times we're not patient with each other. You know, it comes back to that thing where we want what we want, and we want it right now. And I want you to do what I want you to do, and I want you to do it right now. I don't want you to wait, I want you to do it now. So we need to be more patient with each other. In Matthew chapter 7, in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he said, whatever you want men to do to you, that's how you treat them. So do you want people to be patient and understanding with you? Well, if so, then we need to be the same way with those round about us. You know, Jesus also talked about when you're compelled to go a mile, do what? Go 2. You go that second mile. So as we have patience with each other, and you know, you go back and you think about that, what he was telling them there. You remember, the Roman soldier could just pull you out of the street and say, carry my gear for a mile. That was the law. And you had to do it. So that meant that you had to walk 2 miles because you carried their gear a mile and you had to come back to where you was, unless by chance you were going in their direction. But Jesus is saying, you know, that's the law. You do that. But go that extra mile. You go 2 miles, which means if you walk 2 miles carrying their gear, you come back, you walk 4 miles. And I think that required patience. That required patience of those, in the same way with us. It requires patience of us. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 10 talks about, you know, therefore as you have opportunity, do good unto all men, especially those of the household of faith. So we are to do good to each other. And having patience with each other is doing good. Have you ever been in the situation where somebody has lost their patience with you? Have you ever been on the other side of someone losing their patience? It's not very pleasant, is it? But then at the same time, remember, and well, you know, and I just thought about this when I looked at Linda and she kind of shook her head. Think about in restaurants, how many times people lose their patience with the servers and with the cooks, and, you know, because they want what they want and I want it right now. I don't want to wait, I want it now. And so we need to exercise patience with each other. Has God exercised patience with us? He has. He says that He is long-suffering. You know, back when Peter wrote that, it had been about 35 years since Christ had died. And it spoke of His second coming. And they were already at that time experiencing people saying, well, where's He at? He was supposed to come. Where is He at? Where is He? He's really not coming. You know, you go back to where Elijah on Mount Carmel, and you remember what he was saying when they were offering the sacrifices to Baal, and Elijah was saying, hey, well, you know, he may be asleep, or he may be on vacation. He may have gone on a journey. And that's what they were beginning to do then. And what about today? You know, Christ 2,000 years later still hasn't come back. But we need to have that patience with each other and understand that. Also, we need to have patience in soul winning. You know, we won't. If it were up to me, I would want to baptize somebody every Sunday. I mean, that's just, we see that and we realize the importance of that, and we want that, and we want to see that soul winning. We want to see that church growth. And we get in a hurry about that, and some even get to the point of being in a big enough hurry, well, let's change things and make it more appealing. But we can't do that. You remember what Paul told the Corinthians? You know, I planted, Apollos watered, and God gave the increase. So what do we need to do as far as winning souls? We need to do our part and let God do His. As long as, you know, God is the one who gives the increase. In Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost, who added to the church? God added to the church those that were being saved. So we need to be patient in soul winning. You know, and I also think about 1 Peter chapter 3. And Peter was telling wives there, well, let's just read that in 1 Peter chapter 3. Wives, likewise be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied with fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging of hair, wearing of gold, and putting on fine apparel. What's Peter saying there to the wives of those who were not obedient to the gospel? Just be patient, live your life, be a good example, show them how to live, and then they will be one. And be patient. And there again, we get in a hurry. We want it to happen now. We don't want it to wait till tomorrow. But we need to make sure that we understand that we are patient. And also you think about Noah, someone who was a patient preacher. In 2 Peter chapter 2, it says Noah was a preacher of righteousness. Noah was a preacher of righteousness. While the ark was being prepared, Noah was preaching. Do you think he ever lost his patience with those that wouldn't listen? More didn't listen than did listen. Because Noah and his family, that is 8, that was saved in the ark. So there again, Noah could have said, I'm just going to quit. I'm just going to quit preaching because nothing is coming, there's no fruit being born. But yet, he continued on. He preached to those, but they wouldn't listen. The fact that church growth may not be the way that we want it, hearts may not just be open or receptive to it at this time. But what do we need to do? We need to do it, continue as Paul did, and continue to teach and preach. Did everybody that Paul preached to obey the gospel? Not at all. And we don't need to expect any more than what Paul did. Paul had people tell him, almost you persuade me to be a Christian. Almost. But yet, and of course, remember Paul said, I wish not almost, but that altogether, that you would become a Christian. And so we don't know whether or not he did or not, but yet Paul was being patient. We used this passage this morning in our Bible class, 2 Timothy chapter 4. It says, be ready in season, out of season, convince, rebuke, with all long-suffering and teaching. Of course, Paul was saying, preach the word, telling Timothy to preach. You do your part and let God do His part. Sometimes we lose our patience maybe with God because we want to take over for God. You go back and you think about Abraham and Sarah. Sarah lost her patience with God because you remember she sent Hagar into him, and Hagar bore a son. And that was not God's plan. God had promised him a son, but they had forgotten that God had said, I'll take care of it. They thought it was more about what they could do than what God could do. So they had lost their patience. We need to make sure that we don't lose our patience and that we continue to do our part, and then God will take care of His part. And along with this soul winning, being patient and winning souls, we need to be patient also about, as I mentioned a while ago, about church growth. We get anxious and we want our numbers to increase and we just want them to grow and grow and grow. And that's good, but at the same time, it does not need to be our main focus. You look at these mega churches, I guess, for lack of a better term, what is the drawing power there? What draws people to that? They don't hear the message of truth. They don't hear what they need to do in order to go to heaven. They hear what makes them feel good, what makes them feel justified. And people are drawn to that, and it's an ideal of if you come to church or if you are obedient, then God's going to bless you beyond measure, and you're going to have all the money you need, you're going to have all the wealth you need, you're going to have everything that you need, and it's all going to be lovely. But that's not what the Bible teaches. We need to make sure that we don't get our hands in the mix and mess it up. We need to do what God said. Remember back in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, we talked about, Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered, and God is the one who gave the increase. So we need to be patient about church growth. And last on my list that I have this morning or this afternoon, we need to be patient regarding the coming of Christ. Christ's return. Do you know people that used to be faithful that are no longer faithful? If we really sit down and begin to think about it, we could probably number a lot of folks that used to be faithful. I can think of men who used to be outstanding preachers in the church but are now no longer faithful. They have gone, the world has gotten a hold of them, and they want to follow the world. They want to make things easy. Max Lucado used to be Max Lucado is an outstanding writer. He has that ability. He has that talent. And he used to be a member of the Church of Christ. But he has strayed from that, because I think that what has gotten in front of him is fame and wealth. And the reason I say that is because I saw a program where he made the statement, if you want to become a child of God, you just ask God or Christ to come into your heart. And that's all you need to do in order to be saved. We need to understand that we need to do God's things God's way, not our way, not change it to suit us, but do things the way God wants us to do, and not give up on the second coming of Christ. Because if we stray away and we die in that condition, then we're going to be lost. We need to hang on and continue, just as Job did when things got rough, when things got difficult. He persevered. He hung on to what he had, and he hung on to Christ, or he hung on to God, and he was faithful to God. Even though he questioned God, he was still faithful to God. Remember one of the statements that Job made when he told his wife, he said, naked I came into this world, and naked I will leave. In other words, I came into this life with nothing, and I'll leave this life with nothing. And the thing that I need to make sure that I do is to stay faithful to God. You think about Jesus coming back when the apostles were standing there watching Jesus ascend up into heaven. And the angels were standing there beside the apostles and said, you men of Israel, or you men, Galilee, thank you, Tommy. You men of Galilee, why stand you gazing up into heaven? The same Jesus, which is going, will come back the same way. He's coming back. When? We don't know. We just know that we need to be ready. And again, there were scoffers then, and there are scoffers now. We mentioned it this morning that, people think the foolishness of what we're doing today. Some people look at it as foolishness, as a waste of time. I would say the majority of people, because I don't know how many people have no idea, no interest in worshiping God. And they're thinking, why are you doing that? What's it going to accomplish? What's it going to gain you? But Jesus is coming back. We need to be patient in His coming back. In 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 9, the Bible says, the Lord is not slack concerning His promise, as some men count slackness. He's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. He's patient with us. He's long-suffering. Why? Because He wants as many as are willing to be obedient to Him to be saved. Now, you think about, sometimes before I started preparing this lesson, I wasn't thinking much about being patient on the coming of Christ. because sometimes we get in a hurry. But yet we need to make sure that we live our life to the end being faithful to God. Making it halfway there, making it two-thirds of the way there, it's not going to do it. We've got to make it all the way. Remember what in Revelation John wrote, "Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give you a crown of righteousness." Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give you that crown of righteousness. That's what we need to strive for. We need to be patient with ourselves. We need to be patient with others. We need to be patient with those whom we are trying to teach and trying to instruct. And we may want someone to become a Christian more than anything in the world. We may want somebody to come back to Christ more than anything in the world. But unless they do it on their own, then it accomplishes nothing. Let's be patient. Let's teach them. Let's instruct them. Let's give them good examples. And hopefully they will finally come back. You know, I've heard of one preacher that in a book that I read the other day. He knew a man that had been the hardest worker in their church. This man's wife was a Christian. This man's children were Christians. This man's grandchildren were Christians. He done, and you know, said if you didn't know, you would think he was a member, because if something broke, he was there to fix it. He would do whatever there needed to be done. But his wife passed away, and he still was not a child of God. 2 years later, he went into the office of this preacher and sat down and talked to him and said, "I've realized she was right and I was wrong, and I want to become a Christian." And he said, "My only regret is that I didn't do it while she was still alive." And you know, you never know, you know, it may not accomplish anything in our lifetime, but it may accomplish something in their lifetime. We need to be patient, but we need to continue to teach the gospel and make sure that we teach the truth. Don't change it. Don't soften it up so that we can gain numbers. We're told that Jesus, if we lift Jesus up, He will draw all men unto Him. This afternoon, if you're here today and you have not been a patient person, and you need prayers for forgiveness of not being patient, we'll pray with you and pray for you. If you have any other sin in your life that you need prayers for, we'll pray with you and pray for you. If you're not a child of God and you desire to be obedient to His Word, we can assist you with that too. We encourage you to come while we stand and while we sing.
Jesus is tenderly calling thee home. Come today, come today. Wipe the sand of love with thy wrong, farther and farther away. Calling today, calling today. Jesus is calling, tenderly calling today. Jesus
if there's nothing else, Mike will come, Mike is going to lead us in a song, he's already here. And Andrew is going to come and lead us in a closing prayer song.
Take the name of Jesus with you, child of sorrow and of woe. It will joy and comfort give you. Take it and wherever you go. Precious name, oh how sweet. Oh what birth and joy I have. Precious name, oh how sweet.
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you, thanking you for allowing us to gather here today